morning.
Good
Look at those
morning.
little handsome cartoon characters.
I know, I love it. You did a good job on those.
Yeah, we're looking
Not
pretty
too
stylish.
shabby. Stylish forever, engraved in comic.
That's
I
right.
know. When is the animated TV series coming out? That's the next question.
The Simpson style is what we need to do next, right?
Yeah.
I've seen those floating around actually. Be kind of funny.
Oh yeah. Turns into Simpson versions.
See what
Nice.
are we on? Episode 7, 8 now?
Number
7, I believe.
7.
Yeah.
Click that
it's awesome.
subscribe link down below to be notified the next time that we go live.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. I think we've got a few topics we want to cover today. Yeah, we want to go over some interesting development on some, Apple side of things, a little bit about the cybercrime industry, and I think, Microsoft Monday, depending what you want to call it, and the outage, and I think a lot of people were affected by that one. So, be kind of curious to dive into that one and see what we see on that one. Cool. So yeah, I guess if you guys want to start with the Apple, just reading interestingly that it seems like recently there's some potential, supply chain type, attacks, if you will, being done with their Xcode platform, libraries being inserted and whatnot. So it's interesting now that we're seeing the Apple side of things, right? Kind of being targeted after. And I know for like many years, it was just kind of thought like, oh, no one goes after Mac or Apple, or they don't really get viruses or things like that. But this is just showing that everything now in the industry is kind of fair game, right? So wherever you can kind of insert yourself or try to insert these back doors, people are targeting and going after. And if you can insert it in the actual development framework, as other people and companies are developing apps, then yeah, it just makes things very scary for future supply chain types of attacks like we've been seeing so rapidly this year and last year.
It does appear that it feels like SolarWinds laid the framework, because it was like, it appears attackers are now interested in conducting supply chain based attacks. So targeting, developers is starting to become quite common. So as a developer, it is indicative that you should probably not just check your own code, but check the presence of malicious code in other third-party projects like Xcode. Because as a trusted project, I imagine when you're kind of just going through, the mundaneness of everyday coding, you're not really performing these security checks. You're not really looking for innocuous code. But this just shows that, like you said, larger organizations are starting to get targeted for these types of things. And fortunately, I don't think this was pushed out to any clients or any customers. However, if it had, there are at least 2 variants of a custom backdoor in there. So it just speaks to how critical it could have been. So good on the SentinelOne team for catching that.
Yeah.
Good old eggshell, right? So I think the thing with Apple is, a lot of people, oh, they're not coming after me, etc. But now they've got a large customer base that's expanded, and so with that, and then the iPhone and iPads and all those other peripheral devices that they've really grown their ecosystem with, it does matter now, right? And then they're supporting multiple platforms and operating systems now. I mean, if you think about their Apple TV platform as an example, they offer that, or the Apple TV Plus, they offer that on Roku and Fire Stick, and so they're expanding their environment. So it does matter to the developer, right? And I always go back to the DevSecOps movement, right? It's not just DevOps, it's DevSecOps, and that's a critical piece of the pie, because the developers they are vulnerable, right? They're humans and they can make mistakes and errors through all of that. And then as we rely more and more on things like GitHub to check code in and out, there's automation built in. And then who's trusting, doing the check, trust but verify type of model overall, if you will. So those are key things I think that keep popping back up to this, is that as we trust the AI and the technology and everything behind the automation and all of that, is who's really verifying everything behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you think about it, like almost, like these developers and app creators are almost like the kind of, layer one, if you will, right? Of like, hey, kind of the first layer of defense where if they can use more secure code or libraries or whatnot as part of their process, then that also mitigates a lot of need for other ancillary security products. Sometimes on top of it, it kind of gives you that solid foundation. And like me personally, I'm not really a programmer, but I've seen and kind of heard people saying, okay, well, I found this kind of a random snippet of code on the internet. It kind of works for my app. Cool, I'm going to use it. And it's like not really knowing what that thing really does, and it kind of just it gets baked in, and next thing you know, it's in prod, and poof, there it is. So I think stuff like that happens a lot, like you're saying, Brian, with like GitHub now, and how people are really leveraging those types of tooling to do that, and their kind of frameworks and whatnot. So just going to be mindful of that for sure.
Yeah, ensuring that even the DevOps frameworks that they're using are in fact secure, and that there are no hard-coded keys, and that they're actually coding in security controls in the run books. So yeah, you're right. It's taking a step back and looking at the dev cycle itself and integrating or baking in security along the way, and not just looking at it from from afterwards or after things have already happened. So.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I think the next thing we wanted to cover is, where cybercrime is at. This headline kind of caught my attention. It's pretty shocking when you look at some of the numbers, right? So if I kind of just read some of this, American victims reported 4.2 billion in losses as a result of cybercrime and internet fraud in 2020, about a 20% uptick compared to 2019. Reading the report, it looks like a lot of these were done through business email compromise, ransomware, but BEC kind of took the whole cake on that one, with it looks like about 19,000 or so complaints in 2020. So it's just very, very crazy right now of what we're seeing with work from home, pandemic, everyone kind of distraught, everything's just kind of turning digital now. But these, threat actors are still leveraging these, lower tier targets, right? I mean, as we all know, phishing BECs and things like that are relatively easier to perform. There's less sophistication usually in some of these attacks, but they're highly effective. We see it all the time in our customer base, the targets and spear phishing attacks and whatnot. So, it just shows you that this stuff isn't going to go away. It's here to stay. It's continuing to rise up, and it's becoming so relevant nowadays.
Yeah. With that financial increase, you got to think about the cybersecurity insurance, right? And what is it doing in that realm? Like I've seen many studies and reports where the premiums are starting to go up significantly because of the amount of payout that they're having to do in the insurance industry. So that makes sense too. And so what are you going to do to improve your environment to protect against that? It's very easy, right, to not realize that that's what they're going after, or somebody go and do it. And the malware that now gets in on machines and then reads the emails, and it's smart enough to come back and reply back within that thread. So it looks like it's a real email, but it's not, right?
Yeah. Well, it goes to show that focusing simply on technical controls is going to leave your organization at risk, because it doesn't matter what kind of third-party next-gen AV or firewall you have. If the modern threat landscape has shifted to individuals and people, it's clear that the focus on the human attack surface and the use of advanced social engineering is becoming the preference of attackers. And so it's imperative that you not only offer these types of things maybe once per year, but continuously offer these kind of mandatory trainings that are not only just educational but simulative, so that you're actually recognizing and mitigating the most modern social engineering attacks. Because these guys they're clever. They're going after people that have more to lose from downtime than they would by paying the ransom. And so they've been able to really effectively monetize this business in a way that I haven't really seen done in at least in the past, but now is becoming much more prevalent. And it's just curious seeing the breakdown of where this is all going, right? $2 billion to social engineering related attacks. However, and not to underrepresent this, but only $30 million in losses to ransomware. And that's an interesting point in and of itself, because it's like, I think it indicates that it's not all technical threats, it's not all technical vulnerabilities that are being exploited. I mean, 2 billion just to social engineering related attacks speaks for itself.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you're kind of convincing someone at that point, from like a CFO level or financial level. You're basically just saying, hey, you're tricking them into giving you money. Pretending they're a vendor, pretending you owe them credit. Like we saw one where it was pretty sophisticated, and they knew which order the actual approvers would go for like a PO, and they were the email was actually crafted in the right order of who would approve it at the chain, and it basically got through. And luckily there was controls at another layer that caught that. But yeah, I mean, to your point, it's interesting that the shift in the money is ransomware almost seeming kind of down, and BEC is just rising and rising. So
yeah, relatively for sure. And then it's crazy just how the pandemic has impacted it, because like you were mentioning, it's all unemployment frauds, small business frauds, these types of things that are more top of mind during the state that we're in. So
yep. The other piece of the pie is the prosecution on cybercrime, right? I think the statistic I read the other day is we're still at 0.05% get caught. So it's a crime of opportunity. And if you're got that many people that aren't going to get caught and that many that are, it makes sense, right? It's going to continue to get worse until we can start prosecuting more and more people and tracking them down to get this stuff, get it stopped.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. I mean, like, a lot of these internet crimes, they like, I think people see them as like this faceless crime, like, you don't really associate a person or, like you see on the news of, hey, so-and-so killed somebody or whatnot, and then like, it's like, who that person is type of thing. This is so, just behind the scenes, and targets move so quickly, and it's a crime of opportunity. And I think to your point, Brian, like, until we kind of see stricter, rulings and governments around like, what kind of penalties are actually paid and how much we go after these types of things. And I know we talked about kind of that, hey, you hack me, I hack you back kind of thing, and that opens up a whole other can of worms. But I think, we have a long way to go in these, digital ages, if you will, of how do we actually prosecute and kind of move forward, things like that.
Yeah, that is a good point, because how often do you really hear about single individuals or single engineers behind these things? It's always groups or nation states, but yeah, you're never getting individuals. So the risk is certainly worth the reward in the current landscape. And I think we're seeing that nowadays. So
So I think our next topic was Microsoft Azure Active Directory outage. So this is an interesting one from many different standpoints, right? So they had another outage late last year that's related to them. They're upgrading their backend infrastructure to be more resilient, if you will, right? And so sometimes these are the challenges that you go through with digital transformation, is having a hiccup or two to make the environment more secure and stable overall. I guess I would just wonder, why would you do these type of changes during the middle of the day when there's going to be a mass impact? Like, can you not look at when these changes should be applied overall, etc.? Like, I know this was a security key, and it finally got caught that it was not rotated, or the metadata flag wasn't followed or whatever. But sometimes you just got to wonder.
Yeah, I think Monday was an interesting day for everybody, right? I mean, a lot of customers, use some form of Office 365 and Azure services, and it was interesting because like I was kind of watching the support feeds, and you're getting people saying, hey, I can't submit like my school paperwork, so showing they're from universities or schools, and yeah, I can't do this and that, and it was kind of this pretty bad situation for a good couple hours, I think, and the downfall of it. And obviously it's going to raise people that say, okay, what's the stability of cloud, and how safe is it, and this and that. But like, in my opinion, it's still the actual benefits are still far greater than trying to build things on-prem nowadays. And and whatnot. So there's still a lot of benefit there, but you're going to get the people that say, oh yeah, see, if I was on-prem, this wouldn't happen, but like nothing's perfect on-prem either, right? So it's just kind of a bad timing to your point. And one of the comments I read actually, Brian, was kind of what you were saying. It's like, hey, time of day and this and that. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, if you're a global company, supporting worldwide customers, like, is there a best time of day? Like, maybe not. Maybe you're going to affect the U.S. versus the U.K. or something, or you have to kind of look at things that way too. So it's kind of an interesting perspective to think about it that way. But yeah, I think what you're saying, right, with the keys and a little bit of code issue there and didn't quite follow the process there, and kablamo. I think it's interesting. It kind of goes back to the core fundamentals of how important cryptography, encryption, things like DNS, like these kind of core services are just so important. PKI to an infrastructure, whether it's something you control or you don't control, and these are things that you really have to kind of watch and monitor and manage, because you can just cause so many problems if one little thing goes wrong, and you can take down just massive global infrastructure. So
yeah, there's certainly a lesson in there somewhere about maintaining redundant backups. I think also it's important to note that this may be kind of an example, if you will, of what's wrong with putting all of your eggs in the cloud basket, versus maybe taking something like a hybrid approach, where you leverage part of your infrastructure. The problem with an outage like this is it's difficult to get customers answers who have outsourced their IT to like a cloud service provider. And when it comes to companies, I believe the most mission critical aspects are, one, its financials, and two, its communication infrastructure, thereby being exchange in teams. And so in this situation, and so when you put the onus on the cloud provider, it really makes you question, how much are you dependent on a single vendor, which I've talked about in the past before, right? Like with SolarWinds, it's like, how much are you dependent on a single, like if AWS, with the amount of market share that AWS owns, like what happens if something like this happens in AWS, right? How does it going to impact the industry then? So, I mean, I think there's some lessons here on, maybe a hybrid cloud approach where you have part of your infrastructure in the cloud and you're maintaining some kind of backup on-prem. You can help avoid the single vendor dependency or just a complete cloud dependency that has probably led to a lot of issues for a lot of organizations that are on that 100% cloud model. And this is not really a crack at cloud. It's more just indicative of that. Not even cloud is 100% going to get rid of the responsibility of uptime
Right.
for your infrastructure, right? So
yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, it leads right into the last topic with files being deleted, etc. But it's around the shared responsibility model that you have, and there's a lot of factors that can go into the cloud, right? So one, you don't pay your bill. They can lock you out and remove you. Somebody hacks your credentials and they get in. They could do damage up inside your tenant, and the provider is not responsible for backup. Like 99% of those contracts don't have anything in there about they're
Right.
going to back up and protect your data. If a user goes in and deletes it all, it might go into a recycle bin, but if they empty that recycle bin, the data's gone. There's no getting it back. And then obviously outages, right, is another piece of the pie. And then there could be some legal things that could occur, right? So they get served warrants or whatever, and they have to disable your tenant or whatever the case might be for some period of time. So there's a number of additional reasons too that could go on. But having a backup of that data somewhere else, whether it's on premise or another cloud or whatever the case might be, to be able to restore and get your business back up and operational is just so key.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things you both kind of touched on that I think are more important in this one. One, Brian, like you were saying, is multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. I think we see a lot of our own customers kind of going that route, right, where they're kind of somewhat splitting the load a little bit and saying, hey, I don't necessarily want it all in here. Maybe this is my primary, and this cloud over here is my backup, and things are somewhat easy to shift and move across for those reasons. And then second, because this was a communications outage, right, between teams and exchange and a few things like that, it almost tested like a slight incident response plan for companies to say, hey, if you guys lose email and Teams and whatever else communication tools, how do you communicate? Like, hey, do we have like everyone's phone number? Can we call cell phones? Can we still take calls from our customers if we're customer serving? Things like that. So it was kind of a good little, hair on fire wake up call of, you can't just email somebody and say like email's down, like, it doesn't really work, right? Or Teams me, like, no, it's down, right? Or it's intermittent, right? Just as bad. So I think there's a little bit of kind of lesson in that too, but just a little bit of panic of, hey, what do we do here if this thing does go down tomorrow, like, or it happens again, right? So things to just be aware of as you're designing for resiliency, redundancy, and just best practices around security as well.
Yeah, you just made something come to mind for me too. It's like when these communications, and tying it back into what we were talking about earlier, when these communication issues happen, it forces you to use alternative channels. Some of them may be less secure, right? Like texting or personal email, which is often an attack vector for attackers who are performing social engineering attacks. So
yeah,
it makes me wonder if there, in situations like these, does it offer a small window of opportunity for attackers to kind of leverage the existing conditions to then successfully execute some kind of social engineering attack? Because more often than not, if I can get you to communicate outside of official channels like Outlook or like Teams, I can then get you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, or bypass some kind of policy or procedure, or even the controls that these things have in place, right? Because Exchange, whatever, might have an email gateway security that's checking for malicious malware, but your personal email may not. So I don't know, just something that came to mind when thinking about the importance of this happening and how it ties back into potential cybercrime. So like, I wonder what the indirect cybercrime loss, financial loss, would be because of this, right? It wasn't a cyber attack explicitly, but what are the damages as a result of it? I would love to know those numbers.
Yeah, could be a part of a much more sophisticated targeted attack, right? Like where if you were saying, hey, I want to, target this customer, take down their primary communication channels, force them to be more secure or use Gmail or, some other mail and cell phone and more texting. And to your point, yeah, it's a lot easier to spoof, influence, and, infiltrate essentially. So it's very, very interesting concept. That kind of rolls us into our last topic, right? Kind of expanding on this. One of the interesting things I saw, kind of watching the whole Twitter feed as this was happening, was a lot of people were saying, "Hey, my SharePoint files are being deleted, or like they're not coming back," and just really weird anomalies around that. And then it looks like there still is some potential residual bugs or whatnot about files were moved to like recycle bins, or just kind of moved around. So Brian, kind of like we were touching on earlier, right? Backups and having the ability to restore, get your data back is super key, right? It's not Microsoft's responsibility. It's not Dropbox's responsibility. Whoever you use, they all say the same thing, like, hey, the data's on you. You own it. You back it up. If you lose it, like, it's bad on you, kind of thing. So kind of interesting that this is one of the side effects, if you will, of the whole Monday Azure issue here. So hopefully these people that have lost some data have the ability to get it back, or at least just restore certain days. I know OneDrive and those do a pretty good job of keeping a somewhat repository there for a little bit to restore. But yeah, there's a good lesson there in that one.
Yeah, I think people think when they exchange money that means that there's that full protection there. So you really have to dive in and read those terms of service and understand that whole shared responsibility model. And what can the business take from the SLA for the RPO and RTOs that the business needs to operate? Can you really afford to lose a whole day's worth of data? So you're only backing it up once a day in 24 hours. Like, can you go back and recreate everything you did the day before? That's a lot of lost productivity, right? So I realize it's not always hard dollars that are lost per se, but it's credibility, reputation, and then not only customer experience. What about the employees and their experience, right? How frustrating is it to lose a day's worth of data when it doesn't cost a super ton to have a backup running of your cloud data at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, well, it certainly makes you think retroactively in these kinds of situations and think, maybe I should have just paid the XYZ to have that on-prem data system. And I'm curious once the details come out about this one specifically, because I don't know if there are too many technical details out yet, but they do say it's it's caused basically by the same thing that caused the initial outage. I guess some curious questions for me is this happening autonomously? It sounds like it is. What the restore process looks like, which sounds like you should be able to sync to restore files. However, there have been a lot of reports that admins have not been able to use the recommended method by Microsoft. So again, tying it back, it does speak again to the importance of having these secure, redundant backups, and then also ensuring that the ownership, who's in charge, who maintains these backups, and who has access to these backups. That's another thing that it kind of brings into question, because while you're also managing your vendor ecosystem, you should be managing your internal trust model and who is able to actually manage the data once it has been lost, and who's able to actually bring it online. So it seems that for organizations that had this process down, they should have been able to recover quickly, but there was a lot of reports of individuals who are still not able to get their files back. So we'll kind of see how that unpacks, and maybe we'll have more details on it on the next podcast too.
Yeah, thinking about the CIA triad, right? It's that integrity piece of the pie that's kind of in question.
Availability and integrity. There you go.
So yeah, and then ransomware, like we shouldn't forget about that. Like that's another reason to lock some of this stuff down. Like I know there's some ransomware protection in OneDrive, but if you don't use some of those lockers and some of the other things that are set up, what protection do you really have? So even another reason to consider backups, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian, like you said before a few times, where if you think about this, at the end of the day, like no matter what happens, backup is like literally your last hope, if you will, right? If all else hits the fan and you get ransomware, you lose files, everything crashes. Okay, I have my USB key, I have my offsite storage, whatever it is, multi-cloud, somewhere else. That's ultimately your saving grace to get your business back up. And just kind of want to say a PSA is, backing up is one thing, but also testing, frequently that you can restore is another one. I think we've all heard horror stories of people saying, yeah, I back up, and they go to restore and it's like, yeah, good luck. It hasn't restored correctly for 2 years or something, right? And then they're just they're hosed. So luckily, I think, a lot of new tools make it easy to test those backups now, but please do.
All those old tapes, good luck restoring them, right? Because you probably don't even have that tape library. I still have a physical dongle. Not only do I use the cloud, but I have a physical drive that I back up to as well, right? Now everybody knows what it looks like. So when they come pillaging through my desk and it's gone, I know that my backups are gone. Yeah, I used to always say it's all about recovery, right? It's not about the backup. It's about the actual ability to execute the recovery.
Yeah.
So yeah, back to those tape libraries and the old tape drives. Like having a whole plethora of LTO4 tapes is probably going to do you not much good if you can't recover back from them.
It's going to end up in a museum one day soon with the giant tape arrays and the old spinning reels and whatnot. So crazy how much technology changes quickly.
This is where we used to save our data, kids.
Yeah, the size of an airplane, right?
Yeah, right. Right.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, I think that's the topics we have today, guys. Thanks for hopping on, and again, thanks to our viewers. So, if you guys like the topics and want to see more, comment, subscribe, let us know what you think, give us some ideas. I think in the future we're going to be bringing on a few co-hosts here and there, and just kind of bring you guys some new content. So, thanks everybody for hopping on, and have a good weekend.
All right.
Thanks for joining, guys.
Take care.
See you next time.